Good evening, and thank you for attending the August the 9th, 2021 meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. The agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. You may also follow along by connecting to the district's website at www.wcsoh.org. Click on our district link, then select Board of Education, and then Board Docs Agenda, and select this evening's meeting. There will be two opportunities to address the board this evening. The first being Agenda Item 6.01. The first set of public comments is relative to Agenda Items 7.01 through 11.02. Please state the agenda items you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity is Agenda Item 12.01. There is a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Velardo?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mr. Bell?
Here. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Moving on to Agenda Item 3.01, Summer Graduation. May I please have a motion and a second to recognize the students who have the students that are candidates for summer graduation from Westerville Central, Westerville North, and Westerville South High Schools who have completed all of the local and state requirements.
So moved. Second.
Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. And with that, Dr. Kellogg?
Thank you, President Bell. This is always a highlight moment when we get an opportunity to recognize our graduates, and so we appreciate them being here this evening and the opportunity. President Bell, members of the Board of Education, distinguished current and former faculty and staff, honored guests, and proud families of the graduates of Westerville Central, Westerville North, and Westerville South High Schools, the state of Ohio establishes in law 2 requirements for earning a high school diploma: the successful completion of a rigorous academic curriculum and the successful completion of all state of Ohio graduation requirements. The administration of Westerville City Schools has verified, and the Board of Education has unanimously approved their candidacy for graduation. And so, it is with great pleasure as Superintendent of Westerville City Schools that I confer to each semester graduate a Westerville City Schools State of Ohio diploma. So to officially commence the ceremony, I'm going to invite each of the principals one at a time to come up. Not all of their graduates are here, but they'd like to say a few words in honor of those graduates. So I'd first like to invite to the podium the principal of Westerville Central High School, Tom Lanier.
Thank you, Dr. Kellogg. President Bell, Vice President Nestor Baker, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Kellogg, and Treasurer Marshall. This is, as a high school principal, it's the best job in the world. It's the most fun job in the world. And this is the time of year, and these types of events are the most fun that I get to do. And I'm sure Mr. Yancey and Mr. Hensley will echo that sentiment, because we get to acknowledge great works of our students and are very proud of their achievement. I wear a little bracelet on my wrist, and it says "Never Give Up." And I wear that at all times because that is something that is very important, I think, not just in the job that I do, but as we're working and walking through this life together. I think never give up is kind of the motto that we want to maintain. And it's very appropriate for this evening because these students didn't give up. and they worked through a lot of adversity, and they put themselves in a position to graduate and receive a diploma from Westerville City Schools. So with that said, I'm very proud of the two folks who are from Westerville Central who are graduating tonight. They have various reasons why they're not here, but they were very excited to receive their diploma and are very excited to move forward after graduating from Central. Our two graduates that we're honoring this evening are Asher Adson and Ann Sali. So please give them a round of applause, even though they're not here. We're very proud of them. And it's my pleasure to introduce the principal from Westerville North, Mr. Kurt Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Lanier. Good evening. My name is Kurt Yancey, and I am the principal at Westerville North High School. It is my pleasure to be able to publicly say congratulations to all of the graduates, all of our graduates tonight, and to wish you all luck in all that you do. On behalf of the entire Westerville North learning community and all other district employees who have affected your life, please accept our congratulations for your accomplishment. We are all very, very proud of the Westerville Central Warhawks, the Westerville North Warriors, and the Westerville South Wildcats, who are becoming alumni this evening. Before you cross this bridge officially, I wanted to give you a couple of pieces of advice. No matter what happens from here, please continue to push yourself to keep moving forward. You will fail at times, but failure should be seen as a positive, even though it doesn't always feel very good. In the words of the great Henry Ford, failure is the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Seeing failure as an opportunity to learn is a great life lesson for you to remember as you move on to your next adventure. In his work, John Gordon talks about obstacles in life as opportunities to showcase who and what you are. So congratulations to all of the graduates this evening, and it's my pleasure to recognize the graduates from Westerville North High School. I wanted to read their names. They weren't able to be with us this evening, but I do want to recognize them. First, Colin Patrick O'Brien. Next, we have Lucas Jeffrey Pickerel. Next, Joshua Lewis Jensen. And finally, Elijah Zachary Creamer. Can we all give them a round of applause today? So to the graduates, one final thing. You have done exactly what we talk about, persevered through all the adversity that you faced to get to this ceremony tonight. I wish you the best of luck in the future. And now it is my pleasure to turn over the program to the principal from Westerville South, Mr. Mike Hinsey.
Thank you, Mr. Yancey. On behalf of the students and staff and everyone at Westerville South, I also want to echo what everybody else said about being proud of our summer graduates and thank the board for giving us the opportunity to celebrate them. Perseverance is a skill, and it only comes when people have the opportunity to be challenged and face adversity in a supportive and loving environment. This is a time for our graduates to take pride in what they've accomplished tonight, but also to turn and thank their very supportive friends and family, and thanks, Mom, for being here tonight. South graduates and all of our Westerville graduates, we are so proud of you. Not only have you challenged yourselves to meet the rigorous graduation requirements set forth by Westerville City Schools Board of Education in the state of Ohio, but you've worked through some very challenging times and done things on your own terms and kept demonstrating perseverance. It's my pleasure to read the names of the South graduates. We have one here, thank you, and a few others that couldn't make it tonight. Zachary Perez, Brian Tennant, Isaac Smith, Joshua Stevens, and Joshua Nyangoro. Congratulations to you, and congratulations to all of our Westerville Schools summer graduates.
Congratulations again to all of our graduates. Continuing on with our agenda for this evening, agenda item 4.01. May I please have a motion and a second for the approval of the minutes as presented for the July 9th, 2021 regular meeting and the July 12th, 2021 special meeting of the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second?
Any questions, discussion? Okay, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 5, agenda item 5.01, the superintendent's report. Dr. Kellogg.
Thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So my presentation is all of one slide this evening. I'm going to keep it simple. I know we have a busy agenda in front of us, but I just want to talk about each year at this time, the board asked me to come forward and give a report on our preparedness for the opening of school. Obviously, this year has some new elements associated with that. So I just want to hit on a couple items. I want to start with recognizing where we are at the start of this school year towards our mission of teaching and learning, recognizing that last year we had tremendous disruptions, lots of lost learning opportunities for our kids throughout the pandemic that we're all regretful of and cognizant of as we move into this school year. So we haven't ignored that fact going into this school year, and in fact have put many supports in place both on the academic side and the social emotional side for our students to make sure that this return to full in-person learning after a year of a pandemic, we have what they need in order to be successful in the school year. So you will see at our schools some new wrinkles, some new twists. We are going to continue focusing on their well-being, particularly as we come back and see the challenges that are in front of us now that we hadn't anticipated a month ago. We want to lead from how you're doing, not open your books, and make sure that we're addressing that part of our students' well-being coming back. And I think it's increasingly important that we do that at this time. So I want you to know we have invested and put programs in place to support our kids, and we'll continue that going into the school year to get them back on track after a year of difficulty and disruptions. So an important way to reach that goal, the teaching and learning goal, is to keep our kids in school this year. And as we know, the last few weeks we've had experienced new challenges as it relates to COVID and the pandemic and its impact on schools and the operations in general around us. So with that goal in mind of keeping kids in school so we can maximize our teaching and learning opportunities, we built a decision framework that I've shared with the board and shared with the community. It's based on the health department recommendations. It has references to requirements for masks or when masks would be optional. It talks about physical distancing. Underneath all that will also be the sanitation and hygiene that we normally use, ventilation systems, all those other pieces that we need to put a layered mitigation approach into the current state of the pandemic and COVID. I do want to mention that transportation on school buses right now is regulated by the CDC, and at this time stands as a requirement to wear a mask on public transportation, including school buses. And I know there's been disagreement as to whether or not that is true, but that is the case. It follows an executive order from the president. So we will continue to abide by that regulation as well. One of the new things that has changed since last year as Ohio continues, and may change again based on a conversation we had today with Franklin County Public Health and Columbus Public Health, is quarantine guidelines after exposure. And there's really two different paths. The easiest path is universal masking policies, which is what's being recommended by the CDC, Ohio Department of Health, and our local health departments for public schools in our community right now. And that basically what that says is, as long as the school district maintains a universal masking policy, 3 feet social distancing in buildings, and the other mitigation strategies that I mentioned, there will be no quarantines. And that's significant. We were losing hundreds of students to quarantines last year from past practice. And that's part of keeping kids in school, as well as not transmitting the virus and having people get sick. And that's where we landed in terms of our decision. Underneath that, there are different scenarios depending on whether or not students had masks, whether or not they're vaccinated, and whether or not they're in close contact. And in those cases, it gets complicated as to whether or not they're going to be quarantined, modified quarantine, or isolated. And frankly, it just becomes a tracking nightmare for the school district and for our families in the Ohio Department of Health to try and keep track of who's on a 14-day quarantine with a mask, who's isolated. It just becomes a logistics issue for us moving forward. So I want to make the community aware of that. I had a conversation today with health department officials. That may get some redesign to it as well. And I'll talk some more about some of these here in a moment. So teaching and learning is our mission. We want to keep our kids in school. We have some new guidelines on quarantine exposure. We know what our case rates are, et cetera. The other piece that's impacting our school readiness is construction projects. And so this really is the one that has us most nervous in terms of being prepared. We have ongoing construction pieces going on, inspections, completing work, painting, moving furniture. There's a lot to be done before Thursday, and it would be remiss of me to say we're going to be at 100% with everything operational come Thursday. We will have some missing pieces, more likely to affect operations. I think the cafeteria at South is going to be a little bit behind schedule. We may see some office spaces that are getting done that we need to kind of find an alternative path for the time being. Our focus will be on getting classrooms ready, particularly at the elementaries where we're doing some construction around the new entryways, and that's impacting some classrooms. So priority, classrooms, get those up and running, offices, and then we'll get going. So I would give you a more detailed of where we are today, but in 12 hours, 24 hours, 72 hours, it's going to change again. So it's just a moving target. And frankly, some of what we're experiencing is not just difficulty with the construction timelines, but getting materials. That can be anything from, as we've experienced with technology and the backload of technology, trying to get those pieces in place, furniture, paint. Everybody's doing home improvement, so it's hard to get paint off the shelves. So that is an area where we're going to have to continue monitoring, and Mr. Dorn, Mr. LaRose, and that whole team is doing a great job getting around and checking on those buildings. But I would say to our parents and our staff and our students at some of those buildings, expect a little bit of inconvenience, but we'll get it up and running. In a month from now, it'll be in the rearview mirror, and you'll be excited about the new spaces because they are looking great. So I wanted to touch on that. So I want to go back to the goal of keeping students in school for in-person learning. We are following the recommendations from the health departments. That's Ohio Department of Health, the CDC, our local health departments. I was on a call with them today. They are urging universal mask policies in communities with substantial or high case rates, indoors with 3 feet. I can tell you as of this morning, Delaware County crossed into a high transmission rate. They crossed over 100 cases per 100,000. Their positivity rate is growing towards that 8% threshold that makes them nervous. It's climbed from last week somewhere 3 and 4% to this morning was over 6%. Franklin County this morning is still at substantial, but it's climbed from last week. We're seeing case rates in Franklin County at about 65. As of this morning, it was somewhere over 90. And again, the positivity rate is climbing. So we continue to lean on that CDC county level data as our current community data source. We are working with Ohio State and the Department of Health to get the CATS data that we had up last year, which was specific data to our attendance boundaries, to those living in our attendance boundary. So that really shrinks the community that we're looking at to that boundary. Then having the 2 county datas and our local school district attendance zone data gives us a better picture of where we are as a community. And I anticipate that being up and running here, hopefully within the next 2 weeks. So, go ahead.
Before you go, because some people might not know, explain the CATS again to them.
Oh, you're going to give me the acronym, are you? So, it's a COVID tracking data set. The difference between what you see from the CDC and the Ohio Department of Health is the boundary for the community is literally the school district attendance boundaries. Not county boundaries, not zip code boundaries. It is literally all of the people who live in our school district boundaries. Those are the numbers. And so you have a more granular, localized to your school attendance zone piece.
And that's helpful.
Thanks.
Not everybody knew.
So what concerns me is, look at the trend data. So we have this moment today where we can look at the data and talk about what it means and its impact. Project 3 to 6 weeks as we continue to see transmission rates rise, positivity rates rise, bring kids back in school, what's the impact going to be? And I think our wisest choice is to be as safe as possible and running operations of school with kids in place, participating in extracurricular activities, all the things we want to do to the best of our ability. That doesn't mean that conversations we're having now look different in 6 weeks. I'd like to project better, but it's also quite possible that as we're seeing things, it continues to deteriorate and we have a different set of problems. So trying to guess which way it's going to go is a difficult thing to do, but you can see what the trend data is doing. I talked about the change in quarantining standards and those conditions that have come in place. Again, I'm hearing today those may shift again a little bit. We're meeting with school nurses. School nurses are meeting tomorrow to go over that. And I've talked about our data sites. So here's how I kind of want to close out this piece. It is clear there's differences of opinion as it relates to masks. We know that. We get the emails, we talk to people. We see it not just here, but we see it in other communities. And I can tell you that in other communities where they went with mask optional, they have similar kinds of calls out for moving to mask mandates. So there is clear differences on this issue for a variety of different reasons. And I'm not here to judge the values of those various reasons. I'm just here to recognize that there are a different set of opinions on this. But I believe our board and our leadership team have given careful consideration and listened to the different points of view, looked at the data, considered how people view that, and understand that circumstances are not stagnant. They continue to be fluid. And frankly, the nature of the data today isn't very promising for 2 weeks from now. There's nothing to indicate this is going to stagnate or go backwards. There's everything to indicate it's going to continue to grow. And that's unfortunate. So here's what I'd ask. It's time, and I would ask, at this time, we need to move past these differences of opinion and focus on the core purposes of schools, which is getting kids back to teaching and learning during a health crisis that continues to impact our community. Recognize our differences of opinion. That's where we need to be. Thank you. I don't appreciate it, but don't need the interruptions from anyone. Just this is where we're at now. We do trust our families. We do trust our families who will work with us, regardless of the difference of opinions, so we can all focus on students and their growth and development and get off to a good school year and do this moving forward together. So that's where we are. Those are my comments. Happy to entertain questions from the board.
Questions? Discussion?
I had a conversation with a parent earlier this evening who wanted some reassurance, I think, wanted to understand how often the data are looked at, how often we revisit our thinking, how often this all occurs, because none of us want to be in this situation any longer than we have to be. And I wanted to know if you could address that specifically from your perspective as regards the team's examination of the data. I am very pleased that the CATS data is going to be coming back online. That's hugely important for us. It doesn't do us a whole lot of good to look at entire counties if we can look at our own 52 square mile footprint. So if you could talk a little bit about the examination of data, how often that occurs and how consistently that occurs.
On a personal note, I look at it almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day, just to see. As a team, we will certainly review it on a weekly basis to see where we're at. The best standard for using a measure of how long you should wait to make a change, using the same numbers we do with quarantines, is that 10-day to 14-day timeline. So if we see an opportunity where conditions are improving and we feel there's an opportunity to consider change in those practices, I think that benchmark of 2 weeks out before you make the change to allow for that full running of of protections that we normally look at, 2 weeks from a quarantine, would be the most warranted. And again, a lot will depend on what we're hearing from our health department officials as they look at the data and they make recommendations to us.
Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, can you talk about how frequently we're in contact with the health department and what those communications look like?
Weekly, every Tuesday with Franklin County, Columbus Public Health, with all the Central Ohio superintendents, and then I also meet every Thursday with Delaware County Public Health and some of the Delaware County superintendents.
Thank you. And can you just give us a sense of, like, in those meetings, you're obviously looking at data, you're revisiting their recommendations, just, you know, is there a general pattern to the conversation? What kinds of things are you touching on regularly?
Generally looking at the data, where's it trending? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for their recommendations and how they're doing that? And Delaware County has put together a nice report card, scorecard that they're using right now for part of their recommendations. The second part, then, a lot of Q&A from districts as we try to understand. And then the third part is generally, has there been anything changed in terms of recommendations, policies, et cetera, since the last meeting, and how do we interpret that? And that again becomes the tricky piece, because oftentimes there's language that's put out there by someone, policymakers, that then has to be interpreted and then decoded into words that make sense to people, and then put out into the system, and then there's a lot of Q&A about what is that supposed to mean and how do we do that. So there's a lot of interaction with our health department folks. Have been absolutely fabulous throughout this, meeting with us on a regular basis and helping us make good decisions.
Great. And just one more follow-up to that. In those conversations, when talking about the Delta variant, right, which is what the majority of cases are today, what has the conversation been around that? Because, of course, we had what everyone was doing last year. We have what happened during the summer, you know, in practices during the summer, but then there's this new variant. So I'm just wondering how health departments are, if they're conveying that they're seeing the situation differently with that variant. Just would like to know that impression.
First, I would say that part of their concern has been that the variant has overtaken the original form as being, at least one of the variants, because there's more than one, as taking kind of front seat to creating the problems in the spread. I think they would tell you that they are seeing differences in how it manifests itself in people, both in terms of it seems to transmit quicker, and it seems to have a more powerful impact on people. There's also a concern now about its impact on people and finding cases of people who have been vaccinated. I think what they would honestly tell you is this thing's creeped up into their world so quickly since June, July, that their understanding of all the variables that we want to understand is still trying to catch up. Science doesn't just happen in overnight. It takes a considerable amount of time to go through that and determine and get the data. And so in a system like this, we're talking about huge amounts of data and trying to discern that. So I think they express concern that this Delta variant is different than the original in all the ways we just described. And I think that has elevated their call for action so quickly as we head into this.
Thanks.
So, John, I'm going to share with you some wishes. So I had the opportunity a week ago to speak with a large group of kids from each high school. And their biggest concern, which you know this, but I'm going to say it publicly, they want to be in school and they want to have as normal or typical school experience going forward. So one of the things they asked from me is please, and I know we will, get creative, because we have with graduation and other things. They're worried about dances and extracurriculars and just really the little pieces, curriculum night, just those things. So I want to move a little bit forward and think about some of that, and I would love to hear going forward some of the cool, neat ideas that schools have done I would also say, I think it's really important. I know each school is unique and has their own characteristic, but if we could have the same set of standards and rules for each school, so there's not a disparity or jealousy or any of those little things, I think that would help us become the community again that we want to be. So those are my comments.
I appreciate hearing that from the kids, and that's where our decisions about how we need to approach the start of the school year come. Because the fact is, there's nothing between this virus and its spread. There are limited mitigation standards, and if it disrupts school to the level it potentially could, as it has in the past, a lot of what we just talked about and are wishing for may be at jeopardy again. And so we need to do everything we can, particularly the start end of this thing, to slow down any problems, get school up and running so we can have all the events we want to have. And that's where we're trying to get to. Prom, homecoming dances, theater shows, music shows, athletic pieces, all those right now are on the table as being normal. What happens if we're not in that situation and the recommendations in Ohio and the numbers change and the disruption to our school district is affected? That's what we're trying to perfect. And so frankly, people have varying opinions on me saying it this way, but the inconvenience of a mask in order to reach that goal, as a general rule, seems worthwhile. There are specific individuals, specific cases where that is not as palatable, and we have means of addressing that as well. So, yeah, we want the same thing. I want to see our kids have a normal graduation. I want to see them have theater shows. I want to see them at music concerts. I want to go to their ball games. I want to see them enjoy themselves at school throughout the year.
Mrs. Davidson reminded me, I talked to some kids that are actually in theater. I think these are like middle, young high school. I think that was their age group. And I was talking about masks and all of this, and they said they had just met with some of their theater group, planning for the year. And I said, well, how'd that go? And they said, oh, we were just so excited to be back together. We don't want to risk anything. And so they are on the same side that really everybody is. We want all the kids in and want them in full time. And everybody wants them to stay healthy. But those are just givens. We get that. How you get there and some different paths, we get that. And so Mrs. Davidson reminded me of that talk I had. The only other thing is, I really, Dr. Nestor Baker, I just think it really is important that cats, and you may have said this. Do we have any idea about when that's going to be? I apologize if you said it. I couldn't remember.
I don't have a hard rule. I'm
Okay.
guessing within the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
They're working through that.
Okay. I just think the granular thing really makes a difference to people hearing the story of, we're looking at these neighborhoods. We're looking, that's, I just, I personally am just really excited to look into the kids' eyes live.
I should
And
also, I'm sorry.
And not on a screen. And I think they are as well. So.
The other data sets that we relied on last year that I should mention we're relying on again this year will certainly be student attendance rates, staff attendance rates, and looking at what happens with COVID numbers and positive cases and quarantines. We're going to continue tracking that as a means to seeing how we're doing.
John, I do appreciate that, and I know you and I have had several conversations about this. As you know, I hate wearing a mask, and I had to come to the understanding on my own that wearing this mask is the best way to get it off of our faces. If we come back to school and we wear these masks, what we have to do is get those numbers to begin to regulate downward, keeping our kids in school, keeping our staff in school, keeping our buses running, keeping all of those pieces moving that will let us become the normal we thought we were going to be when we started this school year, because this is not what any of us wanted to see. We wanted to see smiles as well as eyes. And knowing that we have had to move in this direction is very hard for a lot of people. But I wanted to let you know how very much I appreciate the amount of thought and the amount of emotion that you and your team have put into understanding this from all sides and from all perspectives. And there are multiple perspectives that all have worth, and you have not dismissed those. And I appreciate the conversations that you've had. I appreciate the communications that have gone out that have explained everything from why there's no mandate from the Department of Health to legislation that's occurred, to our intention to go granular as soon as we can, and to, if it's possible, sooner rather than later, if it's not, whenever it is possible, to begin to look more strategically at how we address this. So I wanted to thank you publicly for the amount of sweat that you have put into this mentally and emotionally in developing this. It's not easy.
I would concur with that. And I would like to share, I appreciate that the decision is in alignment with the professional health agencies at the local, state, and national level, and includes milestones for when changes will be considered. So we will be looking at monitoring the data, and when it warrants, we will adjust as needed. So I really appreciate that it is in alignment with the advice and guidance of the professional health agencies that have oversight over us. I really do appreciate that. Any additional questions?
Of course. Always have more. Dr. Kellogg, I'm just thinking about families who are trying to prepare their kids to walk into buildings this week. If you could just talk through a little bit about, I know it's hard to speak for the whole district, but some things kids might expect across the district. And then I know there'll be building level differences, but if you could just help us get, especially the young ones, ready to walk in the door, that would be helpful.
First of all, I think you see a lot of smiles through eyes. We had all of our teachers and staff back today. I was at our teacher session up at Central today, greeting teachers as they came in, and all of them expressed excitement of being back, feeling like, okay, I got my mask on, but at least we're back in person. I'm going to have my kids in my classroom. I can do what I'm good at, and I know how to handle this. It's completely different than how we were feeling at the start of last year, even when we moved to blended. So we have staff that are confident that they're ready for our kids. I think what our students and families are going to feel is a lot of welcoming, how you doing, check-in kinds of behaviors before we jump into open your books and start working on our math problems, because we know that the current set of circumstances is offsetting, particularly for young kids, and the change from where we were 6 weeks ago, where we were feeling really good about it and life was going great, and then it twists on us, and then go back even further to what they experienced last year as students and all of the disruption. So we know that coming in, that these young people are feeling that way, and so we're going to continue to greet them, make them feel comfortable, make them feel confident, pay attention to their needs, and get them back to the business of teaching and learning and doing the things that excite them about school, and work past the math things. Our kids are just tremendous assets when you sit and talk to them and you let them have voice and ask them what they're looking for. They are a great asset. And as you'll see in the forthcoming convocation video, I spent some time with some of them, and they gave me all kinds of good advice. And most of it I'm heeding, too. So they're fabulous. And so I think you can expect that kind of welcoming, excited to see you, how you doing, you doing okay with this, let's talk, before we get too heavy into the academic side. If we don't have their hearts and souls right from the get-go, we're not going to get to their minds. And if there's distractions to their thinking because their heart's not in the right place, their emotion's not in the right place, any teaching that's academic is going to be lost teaching. No different than if they were isolated from us. We want them in our rooms and feeling good about being in our rooms and being confident in our rooms. And so watching our staff today really gave me confidence that they're going to walk in rooms confident with the circumstances they have, and that confidence is going to put them in a position to lead our kids the way they need to be led going into the school year. So, other than masks and 3 feet, most of what they're going to see at school is the same thing. At recess, they can take their masks off. There's an expectation to stay 6 feet apart as best as possible at recess. They can take class outside if they want to. You'll probably see some of that. Cafeteria, we're going to keep them 3 feet apart. They have to take their mask off to eat. We're going to open that way without trying to spread them all out with 6 feet and see how that goes for us, because that is a risk. That's a risk place. Most everything else, we'll just continue reminding kids staying 3 feet apart, keep their masks on. That's how you avoid quarantines. That's how you avoid isolations. That's how you stay in school. And I think it'll be mostly that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Moving on to agenda item 6.01, public comments. Let's see here. Just a reminder that each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. Please remember to address the agenda item that you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. A timer will be shown on the screen, and Mr. Hershiser will call time when 5 minutes has elapsed. And please address your comments to the board and not to the audience. And for this section of public comments, we have 2 persons that have signed up. The first speaker is Miss Rebecca Soon. I'm sorry.
This is referencing agenda item 5.01, superintendent's comments. There is currently no district in the state with a more restrictive environment than Westerville. Our suburban counterparts have allowed for parents to make health decisions for their children, while Westerville has taken the decision-making out of parents' hands. I am interested in hearing what similarities Westerville shares with Columbus City schools, rather than districts such as Olentangy, Dublin, Worthington, or Gahanna. Tonight, I am asking you to share information with me. You've told us repeatedly that you're listening to local health authorities. Your email references a joint statement by Franklin County Public Health and Columbus Public Health, which is strange as our district is not under the purview of CPH. Notably absent from your list of sources is Delaware Public Health District, under which a significant portion of our district falls. Your mandates exceed recommendations of local health authorities. Unfortunately, mere citizens and parents that we are, we do not have access to Franklin County Public Health, from which you claim to be taking much of your direction. There is a severe lack of transparency in that department of appointed individuals, which only represents a portion of our district, yet is somehow responsible for making decisions that affect my child. From our point of view, it's not unlike taking advice from the Wizard of Oz. Some strange man behind the curtain is calling the shots. Last year, these same public health experts insisted that remote school and then a hybrid system was necessary, but it wasn't. We watched our children suffer academically and developmentally and watched their mental health deteriorate at the advice of those experts, while other nearby districts, such as Big Walnut, successfully stayed in school full-time with no more spread among school children than districts offering limited school time. So I'm a little gun-shy at their advice, and I assume that you would be as well. We aren't talking about a few hours or a few days of wearing a mask at school. We're talking about long-term, possibly all school year. I certainly don't know everything, and I'm hoping that you can assure me that all factors have been considered. As such, I would ask that you share the information that you have from Franklin County Public Health that led you to this decision, including evidence of increased cases in schools with mask choice, evidence of decreased cases in schools with mask mandates, analysis of the impacts of long-term universal masking among school children. I'm particularly interested in the following topics. Education. Does the inability to see facial expressions or speak or hear clearly adversely affect learning? Is the learning environment diminished by the teacher's inability to see nonverbal cues in their students and vice versa? Social considerations. Do kids exhibit different social behavior when masked as opposed to unmasked? Are they as willing to socialize with unfamiliar students and adults in a school setting? Are they less willing to participate in class? Physical. What information do you have regarding increased carbon dioxide levels or bacterial infections associated with long-term mask wearing? Communication. Is there a psychological component of don't speak that happens when a child's face is covered? Are they encouraged to avoid communication? Mental health. What kind of effect does covering everyone's face have on a child's mental outlook? What happens when they don't see a friendly smile in their school building? What about kids who feel anxiety about wearing a mask? And importantly, have these factors been considered for all children? For some, maybe none of these factors are issues, just like for some, remote learning was something that could easily be adapted to. But what about the others? Do you know which of these things will be an issue for my child? I do, because I'm her parent. I think many of us feel that not all of the consequences were considered last year as decisions were being made. Is there any reassurance you can provide us? Have your health experts given you any evidence or data about these topics, or have you done any research on your own into the effects on the whole child? I look forward to your response.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Peg Duffy.
My comments are brief. They relate to agenda item 8.15. At the end of that, there's a statement made that documentation has been provided to members of the board and to the public in advance. Now, having followed school board for over 30 years, I think there's an inaccuracy here because we never see the content of the contracts for some time afterwards. But this leads me to believe that I should have been able to go online and find what is in the contracts that you're going to be voting on. So I ask you, when can we expect to see online the content of the contracts that you will be voting on tonight?
Thank you, Ms. Duffy. Continuing on with this evening's agenda, we will move to agenda item 7.01. May I have a motion and a second for resolution to approve the purchases in accordance with ORC 5705.41D1 and Board Policy 6320.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Or will Ms. Marshall, if you would share on this, please?
Thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So we have 3 invoices that were dated prior to the purchase order date. Ohio law and board policy require that any invoice in excess of $3,000 that is dated prior to the purchase order date be approved by the Board of Education before payment can be made. These 3 invoices had purchase orders in place prior to the end of the fiscal year that ended June 30th. But because the invoices were not received by the end of the fiscal year, they were closed. A new purchase order was opened in the new fiscal year, and the budget has been approved for these purchases. It is recommended that the board approve these purchases so that they can be paid.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion for Ms. Marshall?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. Motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 7.02. May I have a motion and a second regarding the Ohio Pooled Collateral Depository item?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall, would you please share with us about this, please?
Yes, thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So Ohio law requires that we have a depository agreement with banks that hold our deposits. These agreements can last up to 5 years. We're due for a new agreement with Huntington Bank, which is what I have before you here. Huntington Bank processes some of our bond payments, which means they have our funds during an interim period of time and when the payments are processed. It is recommended that the board approve this depository agreement in order to remain in compliance with Ohio law.
Okay. Any questions? Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to the next agenda item 8, which is the personnel consent agenda that is comprised of agenda items 8.01 through 8.15. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Reeves, would you please share with us about the personnel consent agenda?
Thank you, and good evening, President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Mrs. Marshall. I'd like to present to you for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. For the most part, the items in the agenda represent the normal course of our daily business. However, some of the items that deserve to be highlighted in the agenda include the following. We have one retirement this evening. Ms. Joyce Fetro is retiring from her position as a study hall and building monitor at Walnut Springs Middle School. We'd like to thank Ms. Fetro, who is retiring with 22 years of service to our district. You will see several one-time payments which represent a lot of time and effort spent by our teachers this summer in professional development activities. We have had our usual array of resignations, hirings, changes of assignments within our classified and teaching staff as we prepare to begin our school year. On the agenda tonight for your approval, we have one new administrator. Mrs. Shayna Wade Argus is recommended for the assistant principal role at Westerville North High School. Mrs. Wade Argus comes to us from Columbus City Schools after completing the leadership intern program at Columbus South and Lyndon McKinley STEM Academy. It is also that time of year where the board will be asked to approve a slew of supplemental contracts as we look to fulfill our one-year and seasonal athletic supplemental positions. Of special interest, lastly, the board will have for its consideration the collective bargaining agreements from the Westerville Education Association and the Westerville Education Support Staff Association. Along with that are the guidelines for the administrative approved staff, which mirror the adjustments in the WESA agreement. I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Any questions for Mr. Reeves? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. And with that, the motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 9, old business. There is none for this evening. Agenda item 10, new business. Agenda item 10.01, it's the first reading for policy number 2240, controversial issues for revisions. Mr. Hopkins, would you please, Dr. Hopkins, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
If you would please share with us about this policy.
Be happy to. Thank you very much. President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, we are recommending tonight a revision to policy number 2240. This policy is recommended for revision because of changes recently enacted by House Bill 164. Due to House Bill 164, boards are no longer permitted to restrict student exercise of religion to just lunch periods or other non-instructional issues. The revision to Policy 2240 removes a sentence from the current policy that previously allowed the board to restrict student exercise of religion to lunch periods and other non-instructional times. It is recommended for these revisions to be adopted to reflect and adhere to current Ohio law and to maintain accurate policies. Happy to answer any questions you may have for this first reading of this policy.
Dr. Hopkins, I don't perceive that this is going to really change anything that we do.
That's correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, discussion?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Dr. Hopkins. Moving on to Agenda Item 10.02 for a first reading, Policy 6114 for cost principles, spending federal funds for revisions. Ms. Marshall, would you please share with us about this?
Yes, thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So this policy update is due to a recent revision from the Office of Budget and Management's guidance for grant agreements. This language aligns with the revisions and clarifies period of performance for the grant period so that expenditures can be made.
Any questions? Okay. Moving on to Agenda Item 10.03 for a first reading, Policy 6325, procurement of federal grants and federal funds. Ms. Marshall.
Yeah, these updates are also due to the revisions of the Office of Budget and Management's guidance for grant agreements. This language clarifies what is considered an informal procurement method and what is a formal procurement method. The revision also adds a statement for domestic preference for procurement to the extent practicable.
Any questions? Okay. Moving on to Agenda Item, where are we?